When you hear the phrase plastic in the brain, the first reaction is almost always the same. Here we go, another scare story, because it sounds too wild, too convenient for clickbait. Too much like the kind of headline that wants to shock you, not explain anything. Plastic in the ocean, okay. Plastic in fish, already disturbing. Plastic in blood, unsettling. But plastic in your head? The problem is that no longer sounds like pure fantasy, because in 2025, one of the most talked about papers on this subject reported that researchers found microplastics and nanoplastics in postmortem human brain samples. And that is the moment when this topic stops being merely strange. It becomes too real to brush off. But it is important to frame this correctly right from the start. This video is not about panic, not about saying, that's it, your brain is full of plastic, and not about pretending science has already answered every question with total certainty. This video is about something else. It is about the fact that we may have reached a very uncomfortable stage where the question is no longer whether what plastic can get into the human body, but how far into the body it may already be reaching. And that is a much more serious question, because the biggest shock here is not just the finding itself. The biggest shock is the root. How could plastic particles get into the brain at all? Into a tissue the body protects with almost paranoid intensity, into one of the most shielded and sensitive systems we have. To understand why this hits so hard, we need to start with something simple. When people hear microplastics or nanoplastics, many imagine tiny bits of packaging floating around in water somewhere. In reality, it is worse than that. This is not one single material and not one single source. It is a huge family of tiny particles produced when plastic wears down, rubs, breaks apart, heats up, ages, and degrades. Packaging, textiles, household dust, synthetic materials, tires, paints, industrial environments, like all of these can generate such particles over time. And the issue is no longer just environmental. Studies in recent years have reported microplastics and nanoplastics in blood, placentas, lungs, vascular tissues, and other human samples. So the first uncomfortable conclusion has already been made. Plastic is not just around you, it may be inside you. And at that point, a lot of people still stay relatively calm. Okay, fine. The body is exposed to all kinds of things. Maybe it just filters them out, removes them, isolates them. But the brain is different, because the brain is protected by the blood-brain barrier. And that is not just some simple wall. It is a highly selective biological system designed specifically to keep unwanted things out of the brain's internal environment. So if scientists are seriously discussing whether microplastics, and especially nanoplastics, can enter the brain, then this is not some minor oddity. It means we are dealing with a fundamental biological question. What kinds of particles can cross barriers? Under what conditions? At what size? In what amounts? And what happens after that inside the tissue? Current reviews do discuss several possible pathways: through the bloodstream if the particles are small enough, through disrupted barrier systems, and potentially through pathways linked to inhaled particles. But this part needs to be said honestly. A large part of the mechanistic evidence still comes not from living humans, but from models, animals, and cell systems. And this is where the topic becomes genuinely powerful, because now this is no longer just a story about abstract environmental pollution. It becomes a story about the internal anatomy of risk. You live in a world where plastic materials are everywhere. In food, in packaging, in clothing, in dust, in indoor air. And step by step, science is arriving at a deeply uncomfortable possibility. Some of that exposure may not stay outside the body. It may interact with your tissues, then with your bloodstream, then possibly with places it was never supposed to reach. The route through the air is especially underestimated. Most people think about plastic mainly as something you swallow, but recent reviews consistently identify inhalation, breathing particles in, as one of the main exposure routes, along with ingestion through food and water, and that changes the feel of this entire topic. Because now this is not only about what you eat, it is also about what you breathe in as part of ordinary modern life. And now we get to the main question: If plastic particles really can reach the brain, then what happens next? This is exactly where people tend to fall into bad science communication. It becomes very tempting to say something like, well, that means plastic is already damaging the brain. But the honest answer is more complicated. We have to consider the broader picture. This is not a simple binary situation where plastic is either good or bad for the brain. We still don't fully know how these particles affect brain function. What we know is still preliminary. The brain is a complex organ, and these particles may have different effects depending on their type, size, and how they reach the brain. So we must ask, can microplastics affect the brain in the same way they affect other organs? That's still an open question in scientific circles. However, studies have reported significant inflammation and cellular stress in other tissues exposed to plastics, and we can't ignore the implications of that when it comes to the brain. Plastic particles could be doing something inside the brain that we haven't fully studied yet. It could lead to neuroinflammation or even neural degeneration, but we're not there yet. Current research is still working to uncover the full extent of microplastics' effects on the brain. But one thing is clear, plastic particles in the brain could have serious consequences. It may take years or even decades before we fully understand what that means. But the longer we wait to act, the greater the potential risk. The urgency of addressing plastic exposure is clear. We need to study this issue carefully and stop assuming that we already know everything. The evidence is still accumulating, but we need to keep pushing forward. The more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions. This is a global issue that affects all of us. And now we're all part of the experiment. Microplastics are everywhere, and we need to make sure we understand their potential impact. The brain is one of the most important organs, and we can't afford to ignore what could affect it. Understanding these particles will require time, precision, and careful research, but that's how science works, step by step. It builds a body of knowledge that eventually leads to understanding, and this knowledge can guide our actions moving forward. But we can't act on what we don't understand. Our future depends on how we address this issue. And if microplastics are affecting our brains, we need to know. We can't afford to ignore the potential long-term effects. Ignoring this could lead to more severe consequences down the road. We need to prioritize research to understand how these particles interact with the brain. Every piece of data counts in this process. The more we know, the better we can protect our health. This isn't about fear or panic. It's about understanding what's happening and how we can protect ourselves. Knowledge and action are our best tools moving forward. It's time to take the next step. We must continue studying and exploring, and we must be ready to make changes when we understand more. This is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation. The question of microplastics in our brains will only grow in importance. The more we learn, the better we can address this issue. But we must never forget the importance of careful research. Let's continue investigating so we can protect our health and future. Thank you for joining this conversation, because the future of our health depends on the choices we make today. The more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to act. Microplastics are small, but their potential impact could be huge. The more we study, the clearer the risks will become. It's not just a story of what's inside the brain. It's about a global crisis, one that affects not just our bodies, but our entire environment. We need to take action now before it's too late. Change starts with awareness. Once we understand the problem, we can start to make better choices. It's about changing our habits, our consumption, and our mindset. Every little change adds up, and together we can make a huge difference. The road to a healthier future starts with us. We need to make sure that microplastics are no longer part of our future. It's time to take responsibility for what we create and consume. The future of our planet and our health is in our hands. Let's take action now, before it's too late. Together we can create a cleaner, healthier world. The more we act, the better the future will be. We have the power to make a difference. It's time for change. Thank you for being part of this journey. Together we can create a better future for all. The fight against plastic pollution is just beginning. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and stay healthy, friends.